The farm sat on the edge of the prairie, where the land stretched wide and the horizon burned with gold at sunrise. It wasn't much to look at, just a weather-beaten house with peeling paint, a sagging barn, and fields that yielded less each year. But for Clara Mason and her daughter Lily, it was home. Clara had been widowed 5 years earlier when her husband, John, was thrown from a horse during roundup season. The accident had left her with a broken heart and a broken farm, both of which she had struggled to mend ever since. Each morning before the sun rose, she tied her hair back with a faded kerchief, pulled on her boots, and set about the endless work that kept them fed, but always teetering on the edge of hardship. Lily, just 17, had grown up faster than most girls her age. She didn't spend afternoons in the parlor practicing piano like the daughters of wealthier ranchers. Instead, she carried water, chopped kindling, tended chickens, and helped her mother hoe rows in the stubborn earth. Her hands were calloused, her dresses patched, but her spirit shone bright. Where Clara carried the weight of loss, Lily carried a flame of hope. Their days followed a rhythm carved by necessity. In the mornings, Clara milked the cow while Lily fed the chickens and gathered eggs. Together they hauled pails of water from the well, their arms straining but their laughter breaking up the hard work. By noon, Clara would be baking cornbread in the iron stove while Lily prepared jars of vegetables to sell in town. In the evenings, after the day's labor, they'd sit by the fire with sewing in their hands, Clara mending clothes, Lily stitching quilt squares from scraps, but beneath their quiet routine lay unspoken fears. The farm brought in just enough to keep them afloat, but drought or bad harvest could ruin them. Clara worried constantly about Lily's future. What prospects did her daughter have here, on this lonely farm far from town? Suitors were scarce, and the ones who did look Lily's way were either too old, too rough, or interested only in land Clara didn't have to give. Clara's greatest fear was that Lily would end up trapped in the same cycle of hardship she had endured. Lily, however, thought differently. She loved the land, loved the wind sweeping through the fields, the sound of crickets at night, and the freedom of wide open spaces. She dreamed of more, yes, but she dreamed of it here, not somewhere else. In her heart, she believed life had more in store than toil and loneliness, though she couldn't have said what. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in streaks of orange and purple, Clara stood on the porch wiping sweat from her brow with the edge of her apron. She watched Lily carrying a basket of eggs, the fading light gilding her daughter's hair. Clara felt a pang of pride and sorrow all at once. Pride in the strong young woman Lily had become, sorrow that she had no way to give her the life she deserved. The farm, though humble, pulsed with resilience. Each worn beam and patch of earth bore the mark of their survival. They had endured storms, sickness, and loss, and yet here they were, two women against the world, bound together by blood, love, and determination. They did not know that their lives, which had rolled forward in steady hardship for years, were about to be interrupted in the most unexpected way. For on the very night that followed, a storm would come. And with it, a stranger. One whose presence would test their courage, change their fate, and awaken a love Lily never expected. The storm came suddenly, rolling across the plains like a herd of wild horses. The sky darkened in the span of minutes, the horizon swallowed by thick clouds that flashed with streaks of lightning. The wind rose, whistling through the cracks in the farmhouse walls, rattling the shutters and carrying with it the scent of wet earth. Clara had seen storms like this before, but she still felt a familiar knot of worry tighten in her chest. She moved quickly, gathering loose tools from the yard while Lily hurried to drive the chickens into the barn. The animals sensed the weather turning mean. The cow bellowed, and the horses stamped nervously in their stalls. By the time the first heavy drops of rain began to fall, mother and daughter had retreated indoors, soaked through and laughing breathlessly from their dash across the yard. Clara shut the door against the howl of the wind, struck a match to light the lantern, and said, "This one's going to be a bad one." The rain came in torrents, drumming against the roof until it sounded as if the heavens themselves might crash down. Lightning split the sky, and thunder followed so loud the dishes rattled on their shelves. Lily curled up near the window, watching the storm in awe. She had always loved the wildness of it, the way the world seemed alive and untamed. It was during one of those lightning flashes that Lily thought she saw something move out near the barn. She frowned, pressed her face closer to the glass, and peered into the darkness. At first she thought it was just her imagination, shadows playing tricks. But then came another flash, and her heart lurched. There was a figure stumbling through the rain. "Ma!" Lily said urgently, springing to her feet. "Someone's out there!" Clara, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders, hurried to the window. For a moment she saw nothing, but then another burst of lightning revealed the truth. A man, half collapsed, dragging himself along the muddy ground toward their barn. Clara's breath caught. "Lord have mercy!" Without hesitation, Lily grabbed the lantern and threw open the door. The wind nearly snuffed out the flame, but she shielded it with her hand as she plunged into the storm. The rain pelted her cold and relentless, soaking her dress and tangling her hair against her face. But she pushed forward, her eyes fixed on the stranger. When she reached him, she dropped to her knees in the mud. He was unconscious, or nearly so. His shirt was torn and soaked with blood, his face pale under the lightning's flash. He looked young, though worn by hardship, his jaw shadowed with stubble. His chest rose shallowly, each breath a battle. "Sir?" Lily shook him gently, her voice trembling. "Can you hear me?" His eyes fluttered open just a fraction, and he managed a hoarse whisper. "Help! Please!" That was enough. Lily hooked her arms under his shoulders, straining to lift him. He was heavy, but she refused to leave him. Somehow, stumbling and slipping through the mud, she managed to drag him toward the barn. By the time Clara caught up, the sight of her daughter fighting against the storm with this wounded stranger nearly stopped her heart. Together, they got him inside and laid him down on a pile of hay. Lightning cracked overhead, illuminating the deep gash in his side. He was bleeding badly. Clara's instincts screamed danger. A wounded man in the middle of the night could only mean trouble. But when she saw Lily's hands already pressed against the wound, her face fierce with determination, she knew there would be no sending him back into the storm. The wind howled outside. But in that dim barn, something else stirred. A new beginning. The stranger's fate now lay in their hands, and with it, their lives would never be the same. The storm raged long into the night, but Clara and Lily barely noticed it anymore. All their attention was on the stranger sprawled across the barn's hayloft. The lantern light flickered against the rough boards, throwing shadows across his face, pale as bleached linen. His breathing came shallow, ragged, and every so often he let out a low groan that tugged at Lily's heart. Clara knelt beside him, her brow furrowed. "He's losing too much blood. If we don't stop it soon, he won't last till morning." Lily swallowed hard. She had never nursed anyone more injured than a scraped knee or a fever, but something inside her burned with determination. "Tell me what to do, Ma. I'll help." Together they cut away the blood-soaked shirt clinging to his side. The lantern revealed the wound, a deep gash just above his hip, likely from a bullet. Clara pressed a clean rag against it, and the man groaned, his head turning weakly. Lily reached for his hand without thinking, whispering, "It's all right. You're safe now. They worked for hours." Clara stitched the wound with trembling fingers, using the last of her sewing needles boiled in hot water. Lily held the stranger steady, her own hands slick with blood and sweat. The storm outside pounded the roof as though the heavens themselves bore witness to their struggle. By the time the stitches were done, Clara's shoulders sagged with exhaustion. "Fetch water," she told Lily. "We need to keep him clean." Lily hurried to the pump, filling a basin despite the freezing rain that stung her skin. When she returned, she bathed his fevered brow and washed the dirt from his face. Beneath the grime and weariness, she saw the lines of a man who had lived hard, perhaps fought harder, but carried something unyielding in his features, something strong and proud even in weakness. The hours crawled by. They made him a bed of blankets in the farmhouse, carrying him inside when the worst of the storm had passed. Clara fretted, pacing, muttering under her breath about trouble finding them. Lily, however, stayed rooted to the stranger's side. She spooned broth to his lips when he stirred. wiped the sweat from his temple when fever overtook him, and whispered soft words that seemed to reach him even when his eyes stayed shut. It wasn't until the first blush of dawn that his lids fluttered open. For a long moment he stared in confusion at the unfamiliar ceiling, then at the young woman watching him with steady, anxious eyes. His lips parted, his voice hoarse. "Where am I?" "You're safe," Lily said softly. Relief washed over her, nearly bringing tears. "You were hurt. We found you by the barn. My ma stitched you up." His gaze flicked to Clara, who stood stiffly in the corner, arms crossed, suspicion in her eyes. He gave the barest nod, then winced as pain lanced through him. "You need to rest," Lily said quickly, tucking the blanket around him. "Don't try to move." The stranger let out a weak laugh that turned into a cough. "Didn't reckon I had a choice." His eyes lingered on Lily for a moment, as if searching for something. "Name's Matthew." The sound of his name hung in the small room, filling the silence. For Clara, it was a name that carried risk. A man who arrived bleeding in the night would surely bring trouble. For Lily, however, it was something else entirely. Matthew, a man with a story untold, a life etched in scars. As the morning sun crept across the wooden floorboards, Lily felt a shift within her heart. She had saved his life, but somehow she sensed he would change hers, too. The days that followed blurred into a quiet rhythm of care and recovery. Matthew, now no longer just the nameless stranger, remained weak, though his strength returned bit by bit under Lily's watchful tending. She prepared broth, changed his bandages, and read aloud from the old family Bible when the fever kept him restless. At times he would open his eyes, watching her silently with an expression she couldn't quite read. Half gratitude, half something else that stirred in the depths of his guarded soul. Clara, however, remained wary. Though she allowed him a bed beneath their roof, she never let her guard down. She kept the shotgun propped near the hearth and asked questions Matthew never answered. "Who shot you? Why were you on the road alone? Who might come looking for you?" Each inquiry was met with silence, or a vague murmur of thanks for their kindness. It was in the nights, when the house had grown still and the prairie wind whispered against the shutters, that Lily began to notice things. She would sit in the chair by Matthew's bed, drowsing with her sewing or simply watching him breathe, when he would begin to toss and mutter in his sleep. The first time she leaned closer, startled. His face twisted in pain, though not from the wound. It was something deeper, carved into memory. Words tumbled from his lips, broken and raw. "Get back! Don't run!" Then a sudden gasp, his hand jerking toward where his gun should have been. Lily caught his wrist gently, her voice soft but steady. "It's all right. You're safe here." He stilled under her touch, the nightmare receding, though sweat still dampened his brow. His fingers lingered in hers a moment longer than expected before he sank back into uneasy sleep. Night after night, the pattern repeated. He would wake in fits, sometimes with a cry, other times whispering names Lily did not know. Perhaps friends, perhaps enemies, perhaps ghosts of a life he never spoke of. She longed to ask, but each morning, when daylight brought with it clarity, he closed himself off again. One evening, when the fire crackled low and Clara had already retired to her room, Matthew stirred and opened his eyes. Lily, half asleep in her chair, straightened at once. "You should be resting," she said softly. He gave a faint smile, though it did not reach his eyes. "Hard to rest when the past won't let you." The words hung in the quiet. Lily waited, sensing he might finally open the door to his secrets, but after a long pause he shook his head. "Best not to trouble you with my burdens." Her heart ached at the weight in his tone. "Sometimes sharing a burden makes it lighter," she whispered. Matthew looked at her then, truly looked, and for a fleeting moment his guard faltered. She saw not just the wounded cowboy, but a man carrying invisible scars, chased by shadows she couldn't yet name. His gaze softened, almost tender, but then he turned away, closing his eyes as if retreating into himself. Lily didn't press. She only reached out and adjusted the blanket, her fingers brushing his arm. "Then rest, Matthew. "You don't have to fight tonight." The silence stretched, broken only by the crackle of fire, and though he spoke no more, his hand shifted slightly, just enough to touch hers, as if he drew strength from the simple comfort she offered. Clara, watching from the doorway unseen, felt both fear and sorrow, for she recognized what was happening. The threads of something deeper, something dangerous, beginning to weave between her daughter and the stranger who carried secrets in the night. By the end of the week, Matthew was strong enough to rise from his bed. The first time he managed it, Lily was there at his side, steadying him with gentle hands as he staggered toward the chair by the hearth. He winced with every step, but there was a flicker of pride in his eyes, as if he had conquered something great. "Careful," Lily warned, her voice firm but kind. "You'll tear your stitches if you're not," he chuckled hoarsely. "You've a sterner tongue than most trail bosses I've ridden under." Her cheeks warmed, but she refused to look away. "Someone has to keep you alive, don't they?" From that moment, something shifted. Matthew was no longer just the helpless stranger in their care. He became a presence in their home, quietly folding himself into the rhythm of their days. At first, his help was small, lifting buckets, gathering kindling, sweeping the porch while his strength returned. But soon as his wound began to knit and his limbs regained power, he took on more. He repaired the fence posts that had sagged in the last storm, patched the leaking roof with steady hands, and oiled the old hinges of the barn door until it swung smoothly once again. Clara watched all this with suspicion, though she could not deny the usefulness of his efforts. Her eyes narrowed whenever she caught Lily watching him with admiration, or when Matthew's gaze lingered a moment too long on her daughter. But she said nothing, only kept herself busy as though work might keep her fears at bay. Lily, on the other hand, began to look forward to every small moment they shared. She learned that Matthew had a quiet humor, the kind that slipped out unexpectedly, warming the air like sunlight through clouds. One afternoon, as they collected eggs from the hens, one particularly stubborn bird pecked at Lily's fingers, sending her yelping back. Matthew's low laugh filled the barn. "She doesn't take kindly to strangers," Lily said, rubbing her hand. Matthew gave her a sideways glance. "Neither do some mothers." Lily stifled a laugh of her own, though her eyes sparkled. "You noticed?" "Hard not to," he replied, though without bitterness. There was an acceptance in his tone, as if he understood why Clara guarded her daughter so fiercely. It was in the evenings, however, that their bond deepened most. After the chores were done and Clara had retired early with her sewing, Lily and Matthew would sit by the fire. Sometimes he spoke in fragments, about the horses he'd broken, the trails he'd ridden, the stars that looked different in distant territories. Other times he sat silent, staring into the flames as though wrestling with thoughts he would not share. Lily didn't mind. She found she liked the silence too, so long as it was shared with him. One night, as the fire burned low, Lily caught herself studying the scar along his jaw, the way his eyes softened when he let his guard slip. She wondered about the man beneath the scars and secrets, what he had lost, what he still hoped to find. A warmth stirred in her chest, something both frightening and thrilling. Matthew noticed her gaze. For a heartbeat, their eyes locked and neither spoke. Something passed between them, unspoken, undeniable. He was the first to look away, clearing his throat. "You've got a brave heart, Lily. Stronger than most men I've known." The words made her cheeks burn, but her heart soared. In that moment, Clara's warning echoed faintly in her mind. Don't let yourself get attached to a man who may bring danger to our door. Yet Lily could not help it. Day by day, she saw less of the stranger who had stumbled into their lives bleeding, and more of the man he truly was, steadfast, kind, and carrying a weight he had not yet named. And with each passing hour, she found her heart quietly entwining with his, as natural as roots seeking water in the dry earth. It was nearly 3 weeks since Matthew had stumbled into their barn, and by then his strength had mostly returned. The wound, though still tender, no longer kept him abed. He worked alongside Lily in the mornings, chopping wood or hauling water, and often spent afternoons helping Clara mend the sagging fence line. Though she seldom admitted it aloud, Clara couldn't deny the ease his presence brought to the farm. For the first time in months, the chores seemed manageable, the house lighter, but with the comfort came unease. Clara's instincts had not softened, no matter how useful Matthew proved. She had lived long enough to know trouble rarely came announced. And one evening, her fears began to take shape. Lily had gone into town to sell eggs and jars of pickled beans at the mercantile. When she returned, dust on her hem and her basket lighter, she wore a look Clara recognized, worry mingled with something she wasn't ready to say. "What is it?" Clara asked at once. Lily hesitated, setting the basket on the table. "There were men in town, strangers, asking after a cowboy." Clara's hands froze over the dough she'd been kneading. "What kind of questions?" "They wanted to know if anyone had seen a man traveling alone. Wounded, maybe. One of them had a scar across his cheek. He didn't seem the kind to let things lie." Clara's chest tightened. She had suspected from the first that Matthew carried shadows. Now those shadows had names, faces, and perhaps guns to go with them. When Matthew returned from the barn, Lily told him what she'd overheard. He stood very still, his jaw tightening, though he said nothing for a long moment. His eyes flicked toward the window, scanning the horizon as though expecting riders to appear out of the dusk. "Who are they?" Clara demanded. Her voice was sharp, the words heavy with suspicion. "And why are they hunting you?" Matthew ran a hand over his stubbled jaw, sighing. "They're men I crossed. Men who don't forgive easy." "That's no answer," Clara pressed. "It's all you'll get tonight," he said quietly, though there was no anger in it, just weariness. He looked at Lily then, and his gaze softened. "I'm sorry. I never meant to bring danger to your door," but Clara wasn't satisfied. Her mother's heart bristled, fear threading through her veins. "You've put my daughter at risk. Whatever trouble you're in, I won't have it follow her." Lily's voice broke through, firmer than Clara expected. "He's not the danger, Ma, those men are. And if they're hunting him, they're bound to cause harm to someone, whether he's here or not." She turned to Matthew, her eyes bright with something Clara recognized as more than compassion. "We won't turn you away." For a moment, silence pressed heavy between them, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Clara's lips pressed tight, her mind a storm of worry. But in Lily's expression, she saw the same determination John once carried, the kind that would not be swayed. That night, Clara sat long after the others had gone to bed, staring into the dying embers of the hearth. Whispers of trouble had found their way to her farm, carried on the tongues of strangers and confirmed by the shadows in Matthew's eyes. She feared what might come, guns, blood, and loss. And yet, in her daughter's face, she had seen something else too. Hope. A hope that frightened her as much as it warmed her, for hope tied to a man with enemies was a dangerous thread, and she knew that sooner or later it would be tested. For days after Lily's return from town, a tension hung in the air. Though Matthew worked as hard as ever, a heaviness shadowed his movements, as if each stroke of the axe or step across the yard carried a weight unseen. Clara watched him with sharp eyes, certain that trouble pressed closer. Lily, on the other hand, waited with quiet patience, hoping that in time Matthew would trust them enough to unburden himself. It was one evening, when the sun was sinking into the horizon and the prairie shimmered gold, that the truth finally began to unravel. Matthew sat on the porch, his hat tipped low, staring at the open land as if it might swallow him whole. Lily came out carrying 2 mugs of coffee, her step soft. She set one beside him and eased onto the step, her skirt brushing the wood. "You've been quiet," she said gently. Matthew gave a small grunt, lifting the cup. "I've always been quiet." "That's not what I mean." Her eyes searched his face, trying to catch his gaze. "You've been carrying something heavy, and now, with those men in town, I think you owe us the truth." At last he looked at her. In his eyes, she saw both defiance and defeat, like a man torn between silence and confession. He ran a hand over his jaw, then let out a breath that seemed to deflate him. "All right," he murmured. "You should know." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and began slowly. I was working for a small rancher a few counties over, a decent man who treated his hands fair. But a bigger outfit moved in, run by a man named Clay Bowers. He's the kind who takes what he wants, whether it's land, cattle, or people. He was cheating the smaller ranchers, running them off, burning them out if they didn't sell. Folks were scared, and most bent to him. Matthew's jaw tightened, his voice low but steady. I wouldn't bend. When I saw Bowers' men rustling cattle that didn't belong to them, I stood up against it. Tried to warn the town. But Bowers has money, and money buys the law. Before long, his men came after me. The night you found me. That was after they ambushed me on the trail. They meant to finish the job, but I slipped away. Barely. The silence that followed was heavy. Clara, who had stepped onto the porch unnoticed, folded her arms across her chest. So you've brought Bowers' wrath to my farm. Matthew met her gaze squarely. I never meant to. I figured I'd keep moving, but your daughter, she saved me. Without her, I'd be buried out there under the storm. Lily's heart ached at the honesty in his words. She reached out, resting her hand on his arm. You did the right thing, Matthew. Standing up to men like that, it matters. He gave a short laugh, bitter and weary. Does it? All I've got to show for it is scars and enemies. And now you're caught in it, too. Clara's voice was sharp. We can't afford to fight battles that aren't ours. But Lily's eyes never left Matthew. Sometimes battles choose us, Ma, and sometimes the people worth fighting for come with them. For the first time, Matthew's guarded expression cracked. A flicker of vulnerability crossed his face, as though her words had reached a place even his nightmares couldn't touch. He looked at Lily, and the intensity of his gaze made her breath catch. That night, long after they had gone inside, Lily lay awake, her mind turning over the truth Matthew had revealed. He was a man marked by danger, yes, but also by courage, and deep within her, a certainty had taken root. Whatever storm was coming, she could not, would not, turn her back on him, the days after Matthew's confession passed in uneasy quiet. Clara grew more restless, jumping at every sound from the road. Lily, though troubled, seemed steadier, her faith in Matthew unshaken. For Matthew himself, there was no peace. He spent hours each evening watching the horizon from the porch, as if expecting the shadows of his past to appear at any moment. The warning came not in words, but in the rumble of hooves. It was late afternoon when Lily, hanging laundry on the line, froze at the sound, distant at first, then growing louder. Her heart thudded in her chest as she saw riders cresting the rise beyond the wheat field. "Ma!" she cried, dropping the basket. Clara rushed out, her face paling at the sight. "Get inside!" Matthew had already emerged from the barn, rifle in hand. His expression was grim, his eyes narrowed. "It's them." The riders, 4 of them, drew closer, dust rising in their wake. Their faces were hard, their eyes cold, and at their head rode a man with a scar slashed down his cheek. Lily knew instantly who he was, the same figure she had seen in town when they asked after Matthew. They reined in just beyond the fence, their horses snorting and stamping. The scarred man leaned forward in his saddle, his voice carrying across the yard. "Matthew Kane! Thought we'd lost you in that storm, but looks like you found yourself a nice hideout." Matthew's jaw tightened, but he called back steadily, "Bowers sent you." The man grinned, cruel and easy. "Mr. Bowers don't take kindly to thieves and traitors. He wants what's his, and you breathing ain't part of the bargain." His gaze flicked toward Lily and Clara on the porch. "And seems you've made yourself some friends." "Shame, really. Folks who shelter outlaws tend to end up regretting it." Clara stiffened, clutching Lily's arm, but Lily stepped forward despite her mother's grip. "You've no right to threaten us." "This is our home," the scarred man laughed, a sound like dry wood snapping. "Brave girl. Let's see if you're still brave when we burn that home to the ground." He raised a hand, and his men began to spread out, circling toward the barn and the fields. Matthew lifted his rifle. "You'll go no farther." The standoff hung heavy in the air. Dust swirled. Horses shifted restlessly. For a moment, time itself seemed to hold its breath. Then one of the men drew his gun, and everything exploded into motion. The crack of gunfire shattered the silence. Matthew fired, dropping the rider who had reached for his pistol. Clara dragged Lily behind the porch rail as bullets splintered wood around them. The scarred man bellowed orders, spurring his horse toward the barn, but Matthew met him head-on, firing and moving with the precision of a man who had been in more fights than he cared to count. Lily's heart hammered as she scrambled to reload for him, her fingers fumbling with the cartridges. She passed the rifle back just as another outlaw came charging. Matthew fired again, the shot ringing true. The fight was brief but fierce. The outlaws hadn't expected resistance, and Matthew's sharp aim cut their numbers quickly. 2 men fled, spurring their horses hard, leaving the scarred man behind. He snarled, retreating with a promise shouted over his shoulder, "This ain't over, Kane! Bowers'll have your head, and theirs too." Then he wheeled his horse and thundered into the distance. Silence returned, broken only by the rasp of Matthew's breathing. He lowered his rifle, sweat streaking his brow. Lily rushed to him, relief flooding her. Clara, shaken but unhurt, clutched her daughter tightly, her face pale. The danger had come just as Clara had feared. And though they had survived the first storm, they all knew the fight was far from finished. The yard was littered with broken fence posts, trampled earth, and splintered porch wood. Smoke from gunfire still lingered in the air, acrid and heavy. The outlaws had fled, but the sound of their threats echoed long after their hooves disappeared into the horizon. Lily turned, expecting Matthew to set his rifle aside and reassure them. Instead, she saw him stumble. His knees buckled as he dropped to the ground, clutching his side. "Matthew!" she cried, rushing to him. Blood seeped through his shirt, dark and spreading fast. One of the bullets had found its mark in the chaos, tearing into him near the ribs. His face was pale, jaw clenched against the pain, but his eyes sought hers, as if willing her to stay calm. Clara knelt beside him, pressing her apron against the wound. "It's bad," she muttered, her voice clipped with urgency. "We need to stop the bleeding." Lily's hands trembled, but she forced them steady as she fetched water and bandages. She remembered the night she first found him, half dead in the storm, and how she had fought to keep him alive then. Now it felt as though fate had circled back, testing her strength once more. "Stay with me, Matthew," she whispered, dabbing his face with a wet cloth. He gave a faint smile through the pain. "You've done this before." "Then you know I'll do it again," she said firmly, though her eyes brimmed with tears. For hours they worked, binding the wound, cleaning it, praying over him. By nightfall, Matthew lay weak but stable, his breath shallow, his hand occasionally tightening around Lily's when the pain surged. Clara, exhausted, retreated to rest, but Lily refused to leave his side. As the night deepened, Matthew stirred, his voice rough. "Lily, I'm here," she said, leaning close, his eyes, glassy with fever, fixed on hers. "You and your ma? You'd be safer if I left. Bowers won't stop. He'll come again, harder. I won't let you lose everything because of me." Lily's heart clenched. "Don't you dare talk like that. You're not going anywhere. Not from here, not from me." He tried to shake his head, but the effort was too much. "I've only ever brought trouble. First the ranchers, now you." She gripped his hand, fierce and unwavering. "You brought us more than trouble. You brought hope. You stood up for what was right when no one else would. And you showed me what courage looks like. That's worth any risk." His eyes softened, the hardness in them melting under the weight of her words. "I never meant to care for you like this." His voice broke, raw and vulnerable. "But I do, more than I can explain." Her breath caught. She had sensed it, felt it, in every glance, every moment of unspoken understanding between them. But hearing him admit it now, while clinging to life, made her heart ache with both joy and fear. "I care for you too," she whispered, tears sliding down her cheeks. "And that's why you can't give up. We'll face Bowers together, whatever comes." He closed his eyes, a faint smile touching his lips despite the pain. Her words seemed to ease him, to anchor him against the darkness pulling at the edges of his strength. That night, Lily kept vigil, her hand never leaving his. Though his body was wounded, she realized the greater wound lay in his heart, the years of loneliness, betrayal, and loss that had made him believe he was nothing but a burden. Now, as he slept fitfully, she vowed she would not let him carry that weight alone any longer. Love, once unexpected, had taken root, and with it came a resolve stronger than any fear. She would fight for him, just as fiercely as she had fought to save his life. The days following the attack passed in a fragile balance of fear and hope. Matthew's wound healed slowly under Lily's tireless care, but the shadow of Clay Bowers loomed heavy over the little farm. Every creak of the windmill, every rider glimpsed on the road made Clara's heart leap. Yet in the midst of unease, something else had taken root, a bond stronger than fear, deeper than the scars of the past. Matthew, though weakened, refused to be idle. By the second week, he was back on his feet, mending fences and tending stock, though Lily often scolded him for overworking. She would fuss, pressing her hands to his chest to make him sit. And though he groaned in protest, there was always a softened look in his eyes when he gave in. It was the kind of look a man gives when he has found the one thing in the world worth listening to. One evening, as the sun painted the prairie in strokes of crimson and gold, Matthew stood at the edge of the field with Lily beside him. The wheat swayed gently in the breeze, and the land seemed, for the first time in weeks, at peace. "You should know," Matthew said quietly. "I mean to finish this with Bowers. I can't let him keep terrorizing good people. I've run long enough." Lily's heart tightened, but she lifted her chin. "Then you won't face him alone. Whatever comes, you'll have me and Ma." He turned to her, surprise flickering in his eyes. "You'd fight alongside me, even knowing what it could cost?" Her hand slipped into his, small but steady. "Matthew, I've seen what it costs to stay silent, to live in fear. You taught me that standing up matters. And if I have to stand with you against the whole world, I will." The silence stretched, filled only by the rustle of wheat. Matthew's throat worked as he tried to speak, but words seemed too small for the storm inside him. Instead, he drew her close, his hand trembling against her cheek. For the first time, he kissed her, not with the desperation of a wounded man, but with the reverence of one who had finally found the home his soul had been searching for. When they broke apart, Lily's cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright with tears. "I never thought love would come like this," she whispered. Matthew's voice was husky. "Neither did I. I thought my life was nothing but running and fighting. But you gave me something I didn't believe I deserved. A chance at peace. A chance at family." Behind them, Clara watched from the porch. For weeks she had resisted, fearing the danger Matthew brought into their lives. But now, seeing the way her daughter glowed with happiness, the way Matthew looked at Lily as though she were the only star in his sky, Clara's heart softened. She knew that love like this was rare, and once found, it was worth holding on to. In time, Bowers would fall. Whether through the law or through the grit of men like Matthew who stood against him, his power would break. And when it did, Matthew would no longer be a hunted man. He would be free to carve a new life, not just for himself, but with Lily, and perhaps even with Clara as part of the family he never had. That night, as the prairie winds whispered through the wheat, Matthew sat on the porch with Lily's head resting on his shoulder. The stars stretched endless above them, vast and eternal. For the first time in years, Matthew's heart felt steady, healed not by time alone, but by the quiet, stubborn love of a girl who had once pulled him back from the brink of death. The widow's daughter had saved a wounded cowboy, but more than that, she had given him a reason to live. And in return, he gave her a love that would last beyond storms, beyond scars, beyond the dangers of the world. A love neither of them had expected, but both of them knew was forever.